Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The email had been clear, or so Madison thought. Arrive at the Belmont estate at 7 p.m. sharp for your interview with Mr. Harrison Reed, CEO of Reed Global Enterprises. Dress professionally. Be prepared to discuss your qualifications for the executive assistant position. She'd read it 3 times, printed it twice, and even saved a screenshot on her phone just to be sure she had the details right. Madison Clark wasn't the type to make mistakes, not when opportunities like this came along once in a lifetime. At 26, she'd spent the last 4 years climbing her way up from coffee-fetching intern to junior analyst at a mid-tier marketing firm. And this job, this interview, could change everything. Executive assistant to one of the youngest billionaires in the country meant access, experience, and a salary that would finally let her stop eating ramen 4 nights a week. So when she stood in front of the towering wrought iron gates of the Belmont estate that Friday evening, her worn black portfolio clutched against her chest, she took a deep breath and pressed the intercom button. The gate swung open without a word. Madison's heels clicked against the cobblestone driveway as she made her way toward the mansion. It was the kind of house you only saw in movies, all white marble columns, glowing windows, and manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than her yearly rent. Soft music drifted from inside, something classical and elegant, and she could see figures moving behind the sheer curtains. Her stomach twisted. Maybe the interview was at some kind of corporate event. That would make sense. Reed was known for mixing business with networking. She smoothed down her simple black blazer, the one she'd bought on sale 2 years ago, and climbed the front steps. The massive oak door was slightly ajar. She hesitated, then pushed it open. The moment Madison stepped inside, she knew something was wrong. The foyer was packed with people, but none of them looked like they were there for job interviews. Women glided past in floor-length gowns that shimmered under the chandelier light, diamonds dripping from their ears and throats. Men stood in tailored tuxedos, laughing with champagne flutes in hand. A server in a crisp white jacket offered her a tray of hors d'oeuvres without missing a beat. Madison froze, her face burning. This wasn't an interview. This was a party. A very private, very expensive party. Oh God. Her mind raced. She must have gotten the address wrong, or the date, or maybe the email had been a prank, some cruel joke from a coworker who resented her ambition. But before she could back toward the door, a smooth voice cut through her panic. "You look a little lost." Madison spun around. The man standing before her was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just slightly over his forehead, in that effortless way that screamed money. His tuxedo fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body, and his eyes, a piercing shade of blue-gray, studied her with an expression somewhere between amusement and curiosity. I think I made a mistake," Madison stammered, her cheeks flaming. "I was supposed to. I thought this was—" The man's lips curved into a faint smile. "An interview?" Madison blinked. "How did you know?" "Because you're holding a portfolio like it's a life raft, and you're dressed like you walked out of a corporate handbook." He tilted his head. "Let me guess. Executive assistant position?" Her mouth fell open. Are you Mr. Reed?" His smile widened just a fraction. "Harrison Reed. And you are?" "Madison Clark." She forced herself to stand straighter, even though she wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. "I received an email about an interview tonight at 7. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." Harrison held up a hand, cutting her off. "Don't apologize. I'm the one who should explain." He glanced around the crowded room, then back at her. "This is a charity gala. I host it every year. But here's the thing. I did schedule interviews for this week. My assistant must have sent you the wrong address. Madison's heart sank. So, there's no interview tonight? Not officially. Harrison studied her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. But you're here now. And honestly, I'm curious. She frowned. Curious about what? About whether you'll run out that door or stay and prove you can handle being thrown into the deep end. Because that's exactly what working for me is like. Madison's pulse quickened. She should leave. This was humiliating. She was underdressed, out of place, and clearly the victim of some administrative mix-up. But something in Harrison's tone, the challenge laced beneath his calm words, made her pause. He was testing her. And Madison Clark didn't run from tests. She straightened her shoulders and met his eyes. What do you need me to do? Harrison's expression shifted, just slightly. A flicker of surprise, followed by something that looked almost like approval. Walk with me. He turned and started moving through the crowd, and Madison hurried to keep up, weaving between clusters of guests who barely glanced her way. Harrison moved with the kind of easy confidence that came from a lifetime of knowing he belonged anywhere he went. Madison felt like an imposter, but she kept her chin up and her steps steady. They reached a quieter corner near a set of glass doors that opened onto a terrace. Harrison stopped and turned to face her. Here's the situation. My assistant was supposed to be here tonight to help coordinate donor check-ins, manage the auction bids, and keep things running smoothly. She called in sick 2 hours ago. I need someone sharp, organized, and capable of thinking on their feet. He paused. Think you can handle that? Madison's mind spun. This was insane. She'd come here for a formal interview, and now she was being asked to work an event she hadn't prepared for, surrounded by people who could buy and sell her entire apartment building without blinking. But she'd spent years learning to adapt, to problem solve under pressure, to prove she belonged in rooms where no one expected her. She nodded. I can handle it. Good. Harrison pulled a phone from his pocket and handed it to her. This has the guest list, the auction items, and the seating chart for dinner. If anyone has a question, find me. If something goes wrong, fix it before I have to hear about it. And Madison, he added, his voice dropping slightly, don't let them intimidate you. Half these people are here because they want something from me. You're here because I'm giving you a chance. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the noise of the party faded. Madison felt her breath catch. There was something about the way he looked at her, like he was seeing past the cheap blazer and the nervous energy, straight to the part of her that refused to back down. I won't let you down, she said quietly. We'll see. Harrison's lips quirked. Now go. The donors are getting restless, and I'd rather not have a bidding war turn into an actual war. Madison took the phone, her hand steadier than she expected, and turned toward the crowd. Her heart hammered, but beneath the nerves was something else. Excitement. This was her shot, chaotic and unexpected, but hers. She dove in. The next 2 hours were a blur. Madison checked in guests whose names she'd only seen in Forbes articles, directed a lost caterer to the kitchen, and somehow managed to calm down a woman who was convinced her auction paddle had been given to someone else. She fielded questions, solved problems, and kept her smile polite, even when a man in a Rolex asked if she was new to event planning, as if working this gala was somehow beneath him. Through it all, she felt Harrison's gaze on her. He was across the room, shaking hands and laughing with a group of investors. But every so often, she'd glance up and find him watching. Not hovering, not micromanaging, just observing. It should have made her nervous. Instead, it made her focus sharper. When the auction finally wrapped up and the guests began filtering toward the dining hall, Madison allowed herself a single moment to breathe. She leaned against a marble column, the phone still clutched in her hand, and closed her eyes. You survived. Madison's eyes flew open. Harrison stood a few feet away, a champagne flute in each hand. He offered her one. She hesitated, then took it. Barely, she admitted. He smiled, and this time, it reached his eyes. You did better than barely. You were efficient, professional, and you didn't panic when Gregory Ashford spilled wine on your shoe. Madison glanced down. She hadn't even noticed the dark stain on her heel. I didn't have time to panic. Exactly. Harrison took a sip of his champagne, his gaze steady on hers. That's what I need. Someone who doesn't fall apart when things go sideways. Madison's chest tightened. So, does this mean I get the job? Harrison tilted his head. That depends. The night's not over yet. Madison blinked. What do you mean the night's not over? Harrison gestured toward the grand dining hall, where guests were beginning to settle into their seats beneath glittering chandeliers. Dinner is about to start. I need you to sit at my table. Her stomach dropped. Sit at your table. As in, with you? And about a dozen major investors, yes. Harrison's tone was calm, almost casual, as if he were asking her to file paperwork instead of joining a table full of people who probably had more money in their wallets than she had in her savings account. Madison shook her head. I can't do that. I'm not dressed for this. I don't even know half these people. You know me. And right now, that's all that matters. He set his champagne flute on a passing server's tray and met her eyes. Look, Madison, I could hire someone with a perfect resume and years of experience, but that's not what I need. I need someone who can adapt, who doesn't crumble under pressure, and who doesn't bore me to death with predictable competence. You've already proven you can do the first two. Let's see about the third. Madison's pulse hammered. This was beyond anything she'd prepared for. She'd imagined a standard interview, maybe a skills test, a handshake, and a polite. We'll be in touch. Not this. Not being thrown into the center of a world she'd only ever observed from the outside. But Harrison was still watching her, waiting, and she realized something. He wasn't just testing her competence, he was testing her nerve. And if she said no, if she backed down now, the door would close. She took a breath. Fine. But if I say something that offends a billionaire, that's on you. Harrison's smile was quick and genuine. Deal. The dining hall was breathtaking. Long tables draped in ivory linen stretched beneath crystal chandeliers, each place setting adorned with gold-rimmed china and fresh white roses. Madison's heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she followed Harrison to the head table. Every eye seemed to track their movement, curious gazes trailing over her simple blazer and the portfolio she'd finally set down on a side table. She felt exposed, out of place, like a sparrow that had wandered into a room full of peacocks. Harrison pulled out a chair for her, and she sat, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her napkin across her lap. The other guests at the table were already engaged in conversation. To her left sat a silver-haired man with a booming laugh and a Patek Philippe watch that caught the light every time he gestured. To her right, a woman in an emerald green gown leaned toward her companion, whispering something that made him chuckle. Madison felt invisible and hyper-visible all at once. Harrison took the seat beside her, and his presence was oddly steadying. He didn't look at her with pity or concern, just a calm confidence that suggested he'd thrown people into the deep end before and watched them swim. So, the silver-haired man said, turning his attention to Madison with a broad smile, I don't believe we've met. I'm Richard Dalton. Madison Clark. She forced her voice to stay even. It's nice to meet you. Richard's eyes flicked to Harrison. Friend of yours, Harrison. Harrison picked up his wine glass, his expression unreadable. Madison is interviewing for a position with my company. I thought she'd benefit from seeing how we operate outside the boardroom." "Ah." Richard's gaze sharpened with interest. "Brave of you to throw her into this circus. Most candidates would run screaming." "Madison isn't most candidates," Harrison said simply. The words sent a strange warmth through her chest, even as her nerves buzzed. The first course arrived, some sort of delicate seafood dish that probably cost more than her grocery budget for a month. Madison picked up her fork, acutely aware of every movement, every word spoken around her. The conversation flowed easily, touching on markets, mergers, a tech startup someone had invested in. But Madison stayed quiet, listening, absorbing. She wasn't sure what Harrison expected from her, but she wasn't about to embarrass herself by pretending she knew more than she did. Then Richard turned to her again. "So, Madison, what do you do?" "Currently, I'm a junior analyst at Brennan & Associates. It's a marketing firm." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "And you're looking to move into executive support?" Madison hesitated. The truth was, she'd been looking to move anywhere that paid better and offered more stability. But something about the way Richard asked, the way the table had quieted slightly, waiting for her answer, made her choose her words carefully. "I'm looking for a role where I can make a real impact, where I'm not just part of the machine, but helping to build something that matters." Richard smiled. "Well said." "Harrison, you might have found a keeper." Harrison's gaze slid to Madison, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. "I'm starting to think so," he said quietly. The rest of dinner passed in a strange blur. Madison answered questions when asked, laughed politely at jokes she only half understood, and tried not to stare at the sheer excess of it all. But through it all, she was aware of Harrison beside her, the subtle way he'd redirect a conversation if it veered toward something uncomfortable, the way he'd occasionally lean closer to murmur an explanation when someone referenced an inside joke or a business deal she wouldn't know. He was guiding her, she realized, without making it obvious. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate tower of chocolate and gold leaf that looked more like art than food, Madison felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. She hadn't embarrassed herself. She hadn't said anything stupid. She'd survived. As the guests began to stand, mingling again as the evening wound down, Harrison touched her elbow lightly. "Walk with me." They stepped out onto the terrace, where the air was cooler, the noise of the party muted. The gardens stretched out before them, lit by soft lanterns that glowed like fireflies in the dark. Madison exhaled, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. "That was," she started, then paused, searching for the right word. "Intense," Harrison finished. She laughed softly. "That's one way to put it." He leaned against the stone railing, his gaze on the gardens. "You handled it well. Better than I expected, honestly." Madison turned to him. "Is that why you made me stay? To see if I'd crack?" "Partly." He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "But also because I wanted to see if you'd fit." She frowned. "Fit? Into my world?" Harrison's voice was steady, matter of fact. "I don't just need someone who can manage my calendar or book my meetings. I need someone who can stand beside me in rooms like that and not feel like they have to apologize for being there. Someone who doesn't flinch when things get complicated." Madison's heart thudded. "And do I? Fit?" Harrison studied her for a long moment, and the weight of his gaze made her skin warm. "Yes," he said finally. "I think you do." The words hung in the air between them, and Madison realized, with a strange mix of relief and something more complicated, that she'd just passed a test she hadn't even known she was taking. But before she could respond, Harrison straightened, his tone shifting back to business. "Be at my office Monday morning, 8 sharp. We'll go over the details of the position." Madison blinked. So, I have the job? You have a trial period. Harrison's lips quirked. Impress me for a month, and it's yours permanently. She couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. I'll be there. Good. He turned to head back inside, then paused. And Madison? She looked up. Lose the blazer. You'll need something sharper if you're going to keep up with me. Madison laughed, the sound bright and startling in the quiet night. I'll add it to my list. As Harrison disappeared back into the glow of the party, Madison stood alone on the terrace, the city lights twinkling in the distance. She'd come here expecting a simple interview, a straightforward path to a better job. Instead, she'd stumbled into something far more complicated, far more thrilling. And as terrifying as it was, she couldn't wait to see what came next. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Madison's breath fog as she stood outside the Reed Global Enterprises building. It was one of those sleek glass towers that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces that made it look like something out of a futuristic film. She clutched her new leather portfolio, the one she'd splurged on over the weekend, because Harrison's comment about her blazer had made her painfully aware of how threadbare her professional wardrobe had become. The blazer was new, too, charcoal gray with clean lines that made her feel more put together than she had in years. She took a breath, pushed through the revolving doors, and stepped into the lobby. It was all marble and modern art, with a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single slab of black stone. The woman behind it, blonde and impeccably dressed, barely glanced up as Madison approached. Madison Clark. I'm here to see Mr. Reed. The receptionist's fingers flew over her keyboard. Then she looked up with a polite smile. 32nd floor. His assistant will meet you at the elevator. Madison nodded, her stomach flipping as she crossed to the elevators. The ride up was smooth and silent, the kind of silence that made her hyper-aware of her own heartbeat. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that was equal parts office and penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city, and the furniture was all sleek lines and understated luxury. A woman in her 40s, with dark hair pulled into a neat bun, stood waiting. You must be Madison. I'm Caroline, Mr. Reed's senior assistant. She extended a hand, her grip firm. Welcome to chaos. Madison shook her hand, trying not to let her nerves show. Thanks. I'm ready to dive in. Good, because you're going to need to. Caroline gestured for her to follow, leading her down a hallway lined with glass-walled conference rooms. Mr. Reed has meetings back to back today, which means you'll be shadowing me to learn the ropes. I'll warn you now, it's not glamorous. It's coffee runs, calendar Tetris, and putting out fires before he even knows they've started. Madison nodded. I can handle that. We'll see. Caroline's tone was brisk, but not unkind. She pushed open a door to a smaller office, neat and organized, with 2 desks facing each other. This is us. That's your desk. You've got a computer, a phone, and access to his schedule. Don't mess with it unless I tell you to. For the next 3 hours, Madison's head spun. Caroline moved through tasks with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for years, rattling off instructions while fielding calls, sending emails, and somehow managing to keep track of a dozen moving parts at once. Madison scribbled notes, asked questions, and tried not to feel completely overwhelmed. Then, just before noon, the door to the main office opened, and Harrison stepped out. He looked exactly as he had at the party. Sharp suit, calm demeanor. But there was something different about seeing him here, in his element. He moved with purpose, his attention already on the tablet in his hand. Caroline, I need the Whitman contract revised by 2. And tell Michaels I want that report on my desk before end of day. No excuses. On it. Caroline didn't even look up from her screen. Harrison's gaze shifted to Madison, and for a brief moment, his expression softened. "How's your first day?" "Surviving," Madison said, matching his tone. "Barely." He almost smiled. "Good. That means Caroline's doing her job." He started toward the elevator, then paused. "Madison, you're with me." She blinked. "What?" "You're shadowing me this afternoon. Client meeting across town. Caroline will catch you up on the details in the car." Madison shot a glance at Caroline, who just shrugged. Welcome to trial by fire. 15 minutes later, Madison was sitting in the back of a sleek black car, Harrison beside her, his attention on his phone. Caroline had handed her a folder before they left, and Madison flipped through it now, scanning the details. The client was a tech startup looking for investment, and the meeting was at some upscale restaurant downtown. "You nervous?" Harrison asked without looking up. Madison glanced at him. "Should I be?" He finally set his phone down, his gaze settling on her. "Depends. Ever sit in on a negotiation where millions of dollars are on the line?" She swallowed. "Number." "Then yes, you should be nervous. But don't let them see it. The restaurant was the kind of place where the menu didn't list prices, and the host knew Harrison by name. They were led to a private room in the back, where 3 men in expensive suits were already waiting. Introductions were made, hands were shaken, and Madison took a seat beside Harrison, trying to look like she belonged. The conversation started casually enough, talk of markets and trends, but it didn't take long before the tone shifted. The lead investor, a man named Greg Ashford, leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "Reed, I'll be honest. Your track record is impressive, but this deal feels rushed. We're talking about a significant investment with limited data on long-term ROI." Harrison didn't flinch. "You're right. It is a significant investment. But the data you're looking at is 6 months old. The market's shifted since then, and if you wait another quarter to make a decision, you'll be watching your competitors capitalize on the opportunity you passed up." Greg's jaw tightened. "That's a bold assumption." "It's not an assumption." Harrison's voice was calm, steady. "It's a calculated risk. And if you're not comfortable taking risks, then this isn't the right deal for you." The room went silent. Madison's pulse raced. She'd seen negotiations in her old job, but nothing like this. Harrison wasn't just confident, he was commanding. And the way he held Greg's gaze without backing down made it clear who had the upper hand. Finally, Greg exhaled. "All right. Let's talk numbers." The rest of the meeting was a whirlwind of figures and terms, and Madison took notes, her hand cramping as she tried to keep up. By the time they left, Harrison had secured the deal, and Madison felt like she'd just watched a masterclass in controlled aggression. In the car, Harrison leaned back, his expression unreadable. "What did you think?" Madison hesitated. "I think you terrified him into agreeing." "Good." Harrison's lips curved. "That's the point." She laughed, the sound startling in the quiet car. "Is that what I have to look forward to? Working for someone who negotiates like a shark?" Harrison glanced at her, and for a moment, his gaze was almost warm. "Only if you can keep up." Madison met his eyes. "I can keep up." "We'll see," he said softly. "But I'm starting to believe you." The first month of working for Harrison Reed was a baptism by fire, and Madison felt like she was perpetually one step away from either drowning or learning to breathe underwater. Every day brought a new challenge, a new crisis that needed solving before Harrison even realized it existed. A double-booked meeting here, a misplaced contract there, an investor's assistant who needed to be charmed into rescheduling a call without making it seem like Harrison's fault. Caroline had been right. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exhilarating. Madison found herself arriving at the office before the sun rose and leaving long after it set, her mind buzzing with schedules and strategies. She learned Harrison's rhythms, the way he preferred his coffee black and scalding, how he hated small talk but appreciated efficiency, the subtle shift in his tone when he was about to lose patience. She learned to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, to read the room during meetings, to know when to speak up and when to stay silent. And slowly, carefully, she began to feel like she belonged. But it wasn't just the work that kept her on edge. It was Harrison himself. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when the professional distance between them seemed to blur, like the time she'd stayed late to finish a report, and he'd appeared in the doorway of her office with 2 containers of takeout, setting one on her desk without a word. Or the morning she'd arrived to find a new laptop waiting for her, top of the line, with a note in his handwriting that simply said, "You'll need this. Keep up." She told herself it didn't mean anything. He was her boss. This was a job. But then there were the looks, the way his gaze would linger on her for just a second too long, the way his voice softened when he said her name. It was dangerous, and Madison knew it. Still, she couldn't quite ignore the flutter in her chest every time he walked into the room. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything shifted. Madison was at her desk, reviewing the notes from a morning meeting, when Caroline appeared, her expression tight. "We have a problem." Madison looked up. What kind of problem? The kind where Harrison's ex-girlfriend just showed up unannounced and is currently sitting in his office. Madison's stomach dropped. His ex-girlfriend? Caroline nodded grimly. Victoria Langley. They dated for 2 years. It ended badly. And now she's here, probably to cause trouble. Before Madison could respond, Harrison's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was stunning, the kind of beautiful that belonged on magazine covers. Tall, blonde, dressed in a white silk blouse and tailored pants that screamed money and taste. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she walked toward the elevator, her expression unreadable. Harrison appeared in the doorway, his jaw tight, his eyes darker than Madison had ever seen them. "Caroline, clear my schedule for the rest of the day." Caroline didn't argue. She just nodded and turned back to her computer. Harrison's gaze flicked to Madison. "You. With me." Madison grabbed her tablet and followed him back into his office. He closed the door behind them, and the air felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't name. Harrison moved to the window, his back to her, his hands shoved into his pockets. "What just happened?" Madison asked carefully. Harrison didn't turn around. "Victoria wants back in. She thinks she can walk back into my life like the last year didn't happen. Like I didn't find out she was feeding information about my deals to a competitor." Madison's eyes widened. "She betrayed you? In every sense of the word." His voice was flat, cold. "And now she's here, claiming she made a mistake, that she wants another chance." Madison's chest tightened. "Are you going to give it to her?" Harrison turned, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Number." The word was sharp, final. Madison nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "Then why does she think she has a chance?" "Because Victoria doesn't understand the word." "No." Harrison's expression hardened. "She thinks she can manipulate me, charm me, make me forget what she did. But she's wrong." He crossed the room, stopping just in front of Madison, close enough that she had to tilt her head to meet his gaze. "I don't forgive betrayal, Madison. And I don't give second chances to people who've proven they can't be trusted." The intensity in his voice, in his eyes, sent a shiver down her spine. She believed him, completely. But there was something else there too, something that made her pulse race. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly. Harrison's gaze softened, just slightly. "Keep doing what you've been doing. Don't let her get in your head if she tries to. Victoria's good at playing games, and she'll use anyone she can to get to me." Madison straightened. "I won't let her." "Good." Harrison's hand brushed her arm, brief and fleeting, but the touch sent warmth spreading through her. "Thank you." For the next week, Madison kept her guard up. She didn't see Victoria again, but the woman's presence seemed to linger, a shadow over the office. Harrison was quieter than usual, more distant, and Madison hated the way it made her chest ache. Then, on Friday evening, as she was packing up her things to leave, Harrison appeared at her desk. "Have dinner with me." Madison blinked. "What?" "Dinner." His tone was calm, but there was something underneath it, something that made her heart stutter. "I need to get out of this office, and I'd rather not do it alone." Madison's mind raced. This was crossing a line. She knew it. But the look in his eyes, the exhaustion and frustration she could see etched into his features, made her hesitate. "Okay," she said finally. "Where?" "Anywhere that's not here." An hour later, they were sitting in a small Italian restaurant, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. It was nothing like the places Harrison usually frequented, and that seemed to be the point. He looked more relaxed here, his tie loosened, his jacket draped over the back of his chair. "Thank you," he said after the waiter had taken their orders. "For coming." "I know this is." He trailed off, and Madison finished for him. "Unprofessional?" Harrison's lips curved. "I was going to say complicated." She smiled. "That too." They ate, and the conversation flowed easier than Madison expected. They talked about work, about the city, about nothing and everything. And for the first time, Madison saw a side of Harrison that wasn't the CEO, wasn't the ruthless negotiator, just a man who was tired and trying to figure out how to move forward. When dessert arrived, Harrison leaned back in his chair, his gaze on her. "You've surprised me, Madison." She raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "I didn't think you'd last a month. Most people can't handle the pace. And I thought you'd quit the second things got difficult. But you didn't. You stayed. You kept up." Madison's chest tightened. "I don't quit easily." "I've noticed." Harrison's voice dropped. "It's one of the things I admire about you." The words hung between them, and Madison felt her pulse quicken. She should say something. Deflect. Keep this professional. But instead, she met his gaze and said quietly, "You're not so bad yourself." Harrison's smile was slow, warm, and it made her heart stumble. "Careful, Madison. Compliments like that might go to my head." She laughed, the sound bright in the quiet restaurant. "I'll take my chances." When they finally left, the city was dark, the streets quiet. Harrison walked her to her car, his hands in his pockets, and for a moment, they just stood there, the space between them feeling both too wide and too narrow. "Thank you," Harrison said again. "For tonight." Madison nodded. "Any time." He hesitated, then said, "I mean it. If you ever need anything, Madison, you tell me." She smiled. "I will." As she drove home, her mind replayed the evening over and over. It wasn't a date. It couldn't be. But it had felt like something more than just dinner between a boss and his assistant. And as dangerous as that was, Madison couldn't bring herself to regret it. The following Monday, Madison arrived at the office to find chaos waiting for her. Caroline was on the phone, her voice clipped and professional, but the tension in her shoulders was unmistakable. When she hung up, she looked at Madison with an expression that said, "Brace yourself." "What happened?" Madison asked, setting her bag down. Victoria Langley leaked Harrison's acquisition plans to the press. Caroline's jaw tightened. "The merger he's been working on for 6 months? It's all over the financial news. And now the other company's board is threatening to pull out because they think Harrison can't keep confidential information secure." Madison's stomach sank. "How bad is it?" Bad enough that Harrison's been on the phone with lawyers since 5 this morning. Caroline gestured toward his office, where the door was closed, the blinds drawn. He's going to need damage control, and fast. Madison didn't hesitate. She grabbed her tablet and headed for Harrison's office, knocking once before stepping inside. Harrison was at his desk, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression carved from stone. When he saw her, he held up a finger, finishing the call before setting the phone down. "Let me guess," Madison said, closing the door behind her. "Victoria." Harrison's laugh was bitter. She didn't waste any time. "I should have seen this coming." Madison moved closer, her voice steady. "What do you need?" A time machine would be helpful. His tone was dry, but the exhaustion in his eyes was real. "Failing that, I need to convince Whitman's board that this leak doesn't reflect my ability to manage sensitive information, and I need to do it before they formally back out of the deal." Madison nodded. "When's the meeting?" 2 hours. His gaze met hers. "I want you there." She blinked. "Me? Why?" "Because you're the only person in this building I trust not to have a hidden agenda." Harrison stood, rolling his shoulders, as if trying to shake off the weight pressing on them. "And because I need someone who can think on their feet, that's you." Madison's chest tightened. "Okay, let's do this." The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor, with a view of the city that would have been breathtaking if Madison's nerves hadn't been strung so tight. The Whitman board was already seated when they arrived, 5 men and 2 women, all dressed in immaculate suits, their expressions ranging from skeptical to outright hostile. Harrison didn't flinch. He walked to the head of the table, his presence commanding, and gestured for Madison to take the seat beside him. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice calm and steady. "I understand your concerns. A breach of this nature is unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for it. But let me be clear. This leak did not come from within my team. It came from someone outside my company who no longer has any access to my operations." One of the men, a silver-haired executive with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "That's a convenient explanation, Mr. Reed. But how do we know it won't happen again?" "Because I've already implemented new security protocols." Harrison didn't miss a beat. Every file related to this merger is now encrypted and accessible only to a select group of people, all of whom have been thoroughly vetted. And moving forward, any external party attempting to access our systems will be met with immediate legal action. Another board member, a woman with a skeptical expression, spoke up. "And what about the press? The damage is already done. Public perception matters, Mr. Reed. If our shareholders think we're partnering with someone who can't protect sensitive information, they'll pull their support." Madison's pulse quickened. This was it. The moment where everything could fall apart. But before Harrison could respond, she found herself speaking. "If I may," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. The board members turned to her, and Madison felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. But she kept her spine straight and her voice steady. "Public perception is important, but it's also malleable. Right now, the narrative is that Mr. Reed's systems were compromised. But that's not the full story. The truth is, this leak came from someone with a personal vendetta, someone who no longer has any connection to Reed Global. And once we make that clear, once we show that Mr. Reed acted swiftly to address the breach and strengthen his protocols, the narrative shifts. It's no longer about a security failure. It's about a leader who knows how to handle a crisis." The room was silent. Madison's heart hammered, but she didn't look away. Finally, the silver-haired executive leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You make a compelling argument, Miss Clark," Madison supplied. The man nodded. "Miss Clark," he turned to Harrison. "All right, Mr. Reed, we'll move forward. But understand, This is your one chance. If anything like this happens again, the deal is off. Permanently. Harrison's expression didn't change, but Madison saw the relief flicker in his eyes. Understood. Thank you for your time. When they left the conference room, Madison's legs felt shaky, the adrenaline finally starting to ebb. Harrison didn't say anything until they were back in his office. The door closed behind them. Then he turned to her, and the look on his face made her breath catch. That was, he started, then stopped, shaking his head. Incredible. Madison, you just saved a $60 million deal. She let out a shaky laugh. I just said what needed to be said. Number. Harrison stepped closer, his gaze intense. You did more than that. You stepped up when I needed you most. You didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess yourself. You just handled it. Madison's cheeks warmed under the weight of his stare. I told you I could keep up. You did. His voice softened. And I'm starting to think I don't know what I'd do without you. The words hung in the air between them, and Madison felt her pulse stutter. She should say something. Deflect. Keep this professional. But the way Harrison was looking at her, like she was the only person in the world who mattered, made it impossible to think straight. Thank you, she said quietly, for trusting me. Harrison's hand lifted, and for a moment, she thought he was going to touch her face, but then he seemed to catch himself, lowering his hand and stepping back. We should celebrate. Celebrate, Madison echoed, still dazed. Dinner. Tonight. His tone was decisive. You've earned it. She hesitated, her mind warring with her heart. This was a line they shouldn't cross. But God, she wanted to. Okay, she said finally. Dinner. Harrison's smile was slow, warm, and it made her chest ache in the best possible way. Good. I'll pick you up at 7. As he left the office, Madison sank into her chair, her hands trembling. She was in over her head, and she knew it. But as terrifying as that was, she couldn't bring herself to care. Madison stood in front of her closet that evening, staring at the limited options hanging before her. Everything felt wrong. Too casual, too formal, too worn, too new. She'd told herself this wasn't a date, that it was just dinner with her boss to celebrate a professional win. But her racing pulse and the way she'd changed her outfit 3 times in the last 20 minutes suggested otherwise. Finally, she settled on a simple black dress, fitted but not too tight, with a hem that fell just above her knees. It was elegant without trying too hard, and when she paired it with her only pair of heels that didn't have scuff marks, she felt, almost, like she belonged in Harrison's world. Almost. The knock on her door came at exactly 7. Madison grabbed her clutch, took a breath to steady herself, and opened the door. Harrison stood in the hallway, and the sight of him made her heart stutter. He wasn't in a suit. Instead, he wore dark jeans and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, casual in a way that made him look younger, more approachable. His eyes swept over her, and the faint curve of his lips told her he approved. You look beautiful. The words were simple, but the way he said them, low and sincere, made her cheeks warm. Thank you. You look different. Good different. Harrison's smile widened. I'll take it. They drove through the city in his car, the smooth hum of the engine filling the silence. Madison watched the lights blur past, her nerves buzzing. She wanted to ask where they were going, but something about the way Harrison's hand rested on the gear shift, relaxed and confident, made her hold her tongue. When they finally pulled up in front of a building, Madison blinked in surprise. It wasn't a restaurant. It was an art gallery, small and tucked between 2 larger buildings, with warm light spilling from the windows. I didn't know you liked art, Madison said as they stepped inside. There's a lot you don't know about me. Harrison's tone was teasing, but there was something underneath it, something that made her chest tighten. The gallery was quiet, with only a handful of other visitors wandering between the paintings. The walls were lined with abstracts, bold splashes of color and texture that seemed to leap off the canvas. Harrison moved through the space with an ease that suggested he'd been here before, and Madison followed. Her curiosity piqued. "Do you come here often?" she asked. "When I need to think." Harrison stopped in front of a large painting, all deep blues and blacks with streaks of gold cutting through. There's something about art that makes the rest of the world quiet down. Madison studied the painting, then glanced at him. "You're full of surprises, you know that?" "Good. I'd hate to be predictable." They wandered through the gallery, and Harrison pointed out pieces he liked, explaining why certain colors or compositions resonated with him. Madison found herself drawn in, not just by the art, but by the way he talked about it. There was a passion there, a depth she hadn't expected, and it made her see him in a new light. When they finally left, the night air was cool and Madison shivered slightly. Harrison noticed immediately, shrugging out of his jacket and draping it over her shoulders. "I'm fine," she protested, but he just shook his head. "Humor me." The jacket smelled like him, a mix of cedar and something clean and masculine, and Madison found herself pulling it tighter around her as they walked. They ended up at a small bistro a few blocks away, the kind of place with dim lighting and tables so close together you could hear your neighbor's conversation. It was intimate, cozy, and as they settled into their seats, Madison felt the last of her nerves begin to ease. "This is nice," she said, glancing around. "It's one of my favorite places." Harrison picked up the menu, then set it down again. No pretense, no pressure, just good food and better company. Madison's heart squeezed. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Being surprisingly not terrible." Harrison laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "I'll take that as a compliment." They ordered, and the conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from childhood memories to favorite books to the most embarrassing moments of their lives. Madison found herself laughing more than she had in months, and every time Harrison smiled at her, she felt something inside her shift, soften, open. It wasn't until dessert arrived, a chocolate cake so rich it should have been illegal, that the mood shifted. Harrison set down his fork and looked at her, his expression suddenly serious. "Madison, I need to tell you something." Her pulse quickened. "Okay, I didn't bring you here just to celebrate the deal." He paused, his jaw tightening as if he were weighing his words. "I brought you here because I wanted to spend time with you. Not as your boss, not as the CEO, just as me." Madison's breath caught. "Harrison, this is a bad idea. I know that." His voice was low, rough. "You work for me. There are a dozen reasons why this is complicated and messy and probably a mistake. But I can't stop thinking about you, Madison. And I don't want to." Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She should say no. She should tell him this was crossing a line they couldn't uncross. But instead, she said quietly, "I can't stop thinking about you either." The words hung between them, fragile and electric. Harrison's gaze darkened, and he reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "We should be smart about this. We should." Madison agreed, even as her fingers tightened around his. But neither of them moved. The walk back to his car felt different, charged with something unspoken. When Harrison opened the door for her, his hand brushed her waist, and the touch sent a shiver down her spine. The drive back to her apartment was quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was anticipation, thick and heavy, filling the space between them. When they pulled up outside her building, Madison unbuckled her seatbelt, but didn't move to get out. She turned to Harrison, and the look in his eyes made her pulse race. "Thank you," she said softly. "For tonight." Harrison's hand lifted, his fingers brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, achingly so, and Madison felt her breath hitch. "I should let you go," he said, his voice rough, "but I don't want to." "Then don't." The words left her lips before she could stop them. Harrison's gaze searched hers, and then he leaned in, closing the distance between them. The kiss was slow, tentative, like he was giving her a chance to pull away. But Madison didn't. Instead, she leaned into him, her hand sliding up to cup his jaw. The kiss deepened, and everything else faded. The city, the car, the world outside. It was just them, and the heat building between them, and the way her heart felt like it might burst. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Harrison rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cradling her face. "This changes everything," he murmured. "I know," Madison whispered, "and I don't care." Harrison's laugh was soft, almost relieved. "Good, because I don't either." Madison woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her curtains and the buzzing of her phone on the nightstand. She reached for it, still half asleep, and saw a text from Harrison. "Morning. Coffee's on your desk. Don't be late." A smile tugged at her lips, and she couldn't stop the flutter in her chest. Last night had been everything. The kiss, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only person who mattered, the way her heart had felt like it might explode. But now, in the light of day, reality was creeping back in. She was falling for her boss, and that was dangerous. Still, when she walked into the office an hour later, her heart skipped when she saw the coffee waiting on her desk, steam still rising from the cup. Caroline glanced over, her expression knowing. He's in a good mood today. Wonder why. Madison's cheeks warmed, but she didn't respond. She just picked up the coffee and took a sip, letting the warmth spread through her. The day passed in a blur of meetings and emails, and every time Harrison's gaze found hers across the conference table, or when he leaned close to murmur something in her ear, Madison felt her resolve weaken. This was real. Whatever this was between them, it wasn't going away. But then, just before lunch, Victoria Langley walked through the office doors. Madison's stomach dropped. Victoria looked as polished as ever, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, her designer dress clinging to her in all the right places. She walked past Caroline's desk without a glance and headed straight for Harrison's office. Caroline stood, her voice sharp. "Miss Langley, you can't just—" Victoria didn't stop. She pushed open Harrison's door and disappeared inside. Madison's pulse hammered. She looked at Caroline, who just shook her head grimly. This won't end well. Inside the office, Madison could hear raised voices, though the words were muffled. She tried to focus on her work, but her hands were shaking, her mind racing. What did Victoria want? And why now? 10 minutes later, Victoria emerged, her expression icy. She didn't look at Madison or Caroline as she strode toward the elevator, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. When the doors closed behind her, Harrison appeared in his doorway. His jaw was tight, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. "Madison," his voice was clipped. "My office. Now." Madison's stomach twisted, but she stood and followed him inside, closing the door behind her. "What happened?" she asked. Harrison ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "She wants money. A settlement to keep quiet about. Certain things." Madison frowned. "What things?" "Personal things." His voice was sharp. "Things that aren't anyone's business but mine. But she's threatening to go to the press if I don't pay her." Madison's chest tightened. "That's blackmail." "Yes. And if I don't handle this carefully, it could destroy everything I've built." He looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes made her heart ache. "What can I do?" Madison asked quietly. Harrison's expression softened. just slightly. Just stay. Don't let this scare you off. I'm not going anywhere, Madison said firmly. I told you, I don't quit easily. Harrison's lips curved into a faint smile. I know. That's one of the things He stopped, the words hanging unfinished in the air. Madison stepped closer. One of the things you what? Harrison's gaze locked on hers, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. One of the things I love about you. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Harrison's expression was raw, vulnerable, and it made her chest ache. You love me? She whispered. Harrison stepped closer, his hand lifting to cup her face. I didn't mean for it to happen. I tried to keep my distance, to stay professional. But Madison, you're everything I didn't know I needed. Madison's eyes burned with tears, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break. I love you too. The confession spilled out before she could stop it, and the moment the words left her lips, Harrison kissed her. It was different from the night before. This wasn't tentative or careful. This was desperate, urgent, like he was pouring everything he felt into that one kiss. Madison's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. We're in so much trouble, Madison murmured, her forehead resting against his. I know. Harrison's voice was rough, but he was smiling. And I don't care. Neither do I. But their moment was shattered by a knock on the door. Caroline's voice came through, tense. Harrison, you need to see this. Harrison pulled back, his jaw tightening. He opened the door, and Caroline handed him her phone. Madison saw his expression darken as he read whatever was on the screen. What is it? Madison asked. Victoria. Harrison's voice was cold. She went to the press. The next few hours were a nightmare. The story broke online first. A salacious headline about Harrison Reed's personal life, complete with quotes from an anonymous source that were clearly Victoria. The details were vague enough to avoid a lawsuit, but damaging enough to make investors nervous. Madison watched as Harrison fielded call after call, his voice calm even as the storm raged around him. She felt helpless, useless, and furious. Victoria had done this out of spite, out of a need to hurt him, and Madison wanted nothing more than to make her pay. But Harrison didn't crumble. He held a press conference that afternoon, addressing the allegations head-on with a calm, measured statement that admitted to past mistakes but refused to be blackmailed or manipulated. By the time the sun set, the worst of the storm had passed. The press had moved on to other scandals, and Harrison's investors had stood by him. When Madison finally found him in his office, he was sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. She closed the door quietly and crossed to him. Harrison. He looked up, and the exhaustion in his eyes made her chest ache. I'm sorry, Madison. You didn't sign up for this. She knelt in front of him, her hands covering his. Yes, I did. The moment I walked into that party, the moment I agreed to stay, I signed up for all of it. Harrison's gaze searched hers. You deserve better than this. Maybe. Madison's lips curved. But I don't want better. I want you. Harrison pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. But she didn't care. Because in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Victoria, not the press, not the scandal. Just him. And the way her heart felt like it had finally found where it belonged. 2 weeks later, the dust had settled. Victoria's attempts at blackmail had backfired spectacularly, and Harrison's legal team had ensured she wouldn't be a problem again. The company was thriving, the press had moved on, and Madison had officially been promoted to senior executive assistant with a salary that made her old paycheck look like pocket change. But more than that, things between her and Harrison had shifted into something real, something undeniable. They were careful at the office, maintaining professionalism during work hours, But the moment they left the building, the walls came down. Dinners turned into late-night conversations. Coffee runs turned into stolen kisses in the elevator. And every time Harrison looked at her, Madison felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. It was a Saturday evening when Harrison took her back to the Belmont estate, the same place where everything had started. The house was empty. No guests, no party, just the two of them and the quiet hum of the city beyond the gates. "Why did you bring me here?" Madison asked as they stepped into the foyer. Harrison took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Because this is where it all began, where you crashed my party and turned my life upside down." Madison laughed. "I didn't crash it. I was invited." "Sort of." Harrison's lips curved. "And I'm glad you were, because I don't think I'd survive without you now." Her heart squeezed, and she stepped closer, her free hand resting against his chest. "You're getting sentimental on me, Reed." "Maybe." His voice dropped. "Or maybe I'm just telling the truth." He led her out to the terrace, where the garden stretched out beneath a canopy of stars. Lanterns glowed softly, casting a warm light over the stone pathways, and Madison's breath caught at the beauty of it. "This is," she started, then stopped, her throat tight. Harrison turned to her, his expression serious. "Madison, I know we've only been doing this for a few months, and I know it's been complicated and messy and probably too fast. But I don't care, because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Madison's eyes burned. "Harrison." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her heart stopped. "Wait," she whispered. "Are you—" "I'm not proposing." Harrison's smile was gentle. "Not yet. But I wanted to give you something. A promise." He opened the box, and inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple and elegant. "It's beautiful," Madison breathed. Harrison took it out and fastened it around her wrist. "This is me saying that I'm all in, that whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere. And when the time is right, when we're both ready, I'll ask you the question I've been wanting to ask since the moment you walked into my life." Madison's tears spilled over, and she laughed, the sound bright and shaky. "You're impossible, you know that." "I know." Harrison pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. "But you love me anyway." "I do," Madison whispered. "God help me. I really do." Harrison kissed her then, slow and deep, and Madison felt the world tilt. This wasn't a fairy tale, it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs. When they finally pulled apart, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "So, no more crashing parties?" Madison grinned. "Only if you're the one throwing them. Deal." And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the stars, Madison realized something. She'd walked into that party thinking it was a job interview, thinking she was there for a career opportunity. But what she'd found was so much more. She'd found a home, a partner, a love she hadn't known she was looking for. And as Harrison held her close, his heart beating steady against hers, Madison knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. 6 months later, Madison stood in front of the mirror in Harrison's penthouse, adjusting the collar of her dress. It was a deep emerald green, elegant and fitted, the kind of dress she would have never imagined owning a year ago. But a lot had changed in a year. She heard footsteps behind her and glanced up to see Harrison in the reflection, dressed in a sharp navy suit that made him look every inch the billionaire CEO he was. But when he looked at her, his expression softened in a way that was reserved only for her. "You look stunning," he said, his voice low. Madison turned, her lips curving. "You don't look so bad yourself." Harrison crossed to her, his hand settling on her waist. "Are you ready for this?" She took a breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." Tonight was the annual charity gala, the same event where Madison had accidentally crashed a year ago. But this time, she wasn't there by mistake. This time, She was Harrison's partner, in every sense of the word. The Belmont estate was as breathtaking as Madison remembered, but walking in with Harrison by her side felt different. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She belonged here, not because of the dress she wore or the people she knew, but because of the man whose hand she held. The evening unfolded in a blur of champagne and conversation, and Madison found herself laughing as Harrison introduced her to investors and friends, his arm never leaving her waist. She'd grown comfortable in this world, but she'd also learned that it wasn't the world that mattered. It was the people you chose to share it with. Halfway through the night, Harrison pulled her aside, leading her to the same terrace where he'd given her the bracelet months ago. The gardens were just as beautiful, the lanterns glowing softly, and Madison's heart swelled with the memory. "Why are we out here?" she asked, though she had a feeling she knew. Harrison turned to her, his expression serious. "Because I have something to ask you." Madison's pulse quickened. "Harrison, I told you I'd wait until the time was right." Harrison reached into his pocket, and when he pulled out a small velvet box, Madison's breath caught. "And I think the time is right now." He opened the box, revealing a ring that sparkled under the lantern light. It was simple, elegant, perfect. "Madison Clark," Harrison said, his voice steady but his eyes bright. "You walked into my life when I least expected it, and you've been turning it upside down ever since. You're stubborn, brilliant, and you make me want to be a better man. I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're mine." "Will you marry me?" Madison's tears spilled over, and she laughed through them, nodding even before she could find her voice. "Yes." "God, yes." Harrison's smile was blinding. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was pulling her into his arms, kissing her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. When they finally pulled apart, Madison looked down at the ring, then up at Harrison, her heart so full it ached. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." Harrison's voice was rough with emotion. "Always." As they stood there, wrapped in each other, the music from the gala drifting faintly through the night, Madison realized something. A year ago, she'd crashed a billionaire's party thinking it was a job interview. And in a way, it had been. But what she'd gained wasn't just a job. It was a life, a love, a future she'd never dared to dream of. And as Harrison held her close, his lips brushing her temple, Madison knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.